Hello everyone, and welcome to another talk by me, Dhamma Dasa, Sockman Jesus, the man of many names, the meat sack body of many names. So what are we all looking for? What are we all after? Why do people get into spirituality? Why are people curious about Buddhism, Zen, yoga, Hinduism, all of these things? Well, to put it bluntly, sometimes we feel like shit. Sometimes we're suffering and we feel like this is not the way things should be. We want things to be different than this. We feel that there's something different than this. And we go out looking, searching for it, hearing stories about Jesus, the Buddha, Ramana Maharshi, and so on and so forth. So a spark of curiosity comes up, and a beautiful question arises, a beautiful desire arises, a beautiful attachment arises. Can I be free from this suffering? What a beautiful question. You see, in the Four Noble Truths, all suffering is caused by desire. It's true. The Buddha is absolutely true. But remember, not all desire causes suffering, but all suffering has the root cause of desire. I like to keep that in mind. Sometimes people can overanalyze and write books on this subject. But there's negative attachments, and those cause suffering, and there's positive attachments, and those will never cause suffering. So, if those positive can transform into negative, then you need to make a change with that stuff. So I always like to get down to the marrow of the bone, so to speak, as Bukowski said, or Bono. Maybe Bono was reading Bukowski. I know he's a Bukowski fan, and he said that statement, the marrow of the bone. But anyways, a beautiful statement. I like to get down to the marrow of the bone, the brass tacks of the matter, of what the hell I'm talking about. Because in modern society, if you scroll TikTok, if you scroll Instagram, even some of the best spiritual masters, you'll listen to a couple hours of talking. Like, well, what the fuck was that? What the hell does that mean? What the hell they're just talking in circles, talking nonsense. Yeah, so the point is getting rid of suffering. That's what the Buddha was interested in. That's what my teacher Dhammarado says, and I agree with him. That's what he wanted. That's what he said. He wanted to get rid of suffering, not only for himself, but if possible for those around him as well. And the best way to do that is to end suffering for yourself, thereby being a beautiful, joyous light into the world. What happens when we die? Metaphysics. What happens to heaven and hell? The Buddha believed in metaphysics. The Buddha didn't believe in metaphysics. Arguments. What everybody in Buddhism can agree on is that the Buddha cared about pretty much one thing and one thing only: getting rid of suffering. Is there gods? Is there heavens after the physical body dies? I don't believe that the Buddha knew or cared. If you believe that he did know and cared, that's cool too, because it would kind of describe me. On my less suffering days, I'm very leaning towards what they call the super mundane path, or super mundane. Some say it is the teaching of the Buddha. But on my heavy suffering days, on the heavy flow days, I'm turning more towards Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana, Vajrayana, I don't know what they call it, but don't know, don't care. But anyways, then the gods start to appear and the hopes and dreams of heavens occur. But again, these are attachments, desires, but they're beautiful. They're not causing me suffering. On my light days, the pragmatic, super mundane approach does quite well. On my heavy days, the mundane approach sometimes does quite well. Sometimes Just straight up magical thinking does me quite beautifully well, because everything we must realize is magical thinking. If you're thinking, that's all magical thinking. Because attaching to these thoughts, these magical thinkings, they're always in the past or the future. In a weird way, a thought can't be present or can't exist in the present, because there's always moments by moments by moments. Everything is an illusion. Everything, if attached to too much, causes suffering. So in this moment, you may say, Dhamma Dasa believes in the mundane. He believes in sometimes magical stuff. And in this one moment, I saw Dhamma Dasa, and he was believing this totally pragmatic, practical, reasonable, super mundane approach where there's just a psychological Buddhism. But you guys are reflecting these things onto me. I'm here right now in this moment. You're putting these things in my mind. Or in your mind. You're putting these words in my mouth and your mouth. Tempting to put them in my mouth. But really, what's the truth of the matter is there's a miraculous being, and I don't know what all the answers are. I don't know where it all comes from. But I know that the past self and the future self don't exist. And I know that this present moment self, free from suffering, however it gets there, is my true nature. Because it's the easiest way to be. There's no effort, after a while. Of course there's effort at first. But after a while, it becomes light. Like, I used to make a poem about a bird flying. He's so worried about flying and getting the angles correct, but he never leaves the ground, He's so worried about, should I flap my wings the mundane way, the Mahayana way, the super mundane way, the Zen way, the Hindu way? Just start fucking flapping your wings and see what happens. Test, experiment. That's what the Buddha said. Go within yourself. Yeah, reading the book between our own ears. Well, you got to start somewhere. Is this correct? Is this correct? Who gives a fuck? But my teacher says this is the wrong way to practice. While you're suffering? No. Then what the fuck do you care what your teacher says? What do you care what the Buddha says if what you're doing is causing you suffering? Change it. If it stops causing you suffering, follow that. Why is that so difficult? These circles that get attached to these religions and philosophies and ideas and the Pali Canon, the Buddha didn't even write the Pali Canon. His students wrote the Pali Canon. And I talked to some but I've seen some YouTube Zen masters, such as, what's his name? Brad. Is it Brad? No, that's Sublime. His name's Brad, and he wrote the book, Hardcore Zen and Sit Down and Shut Up. Great writer. And he says he's established Zen centers and ordained some people priests, and they've run amok with their things, some of them. I'm paraphrasing here. And they've created their own doctrines that have nothing to do with his original teachings. And it makes him wonder, what were all these people saying, repeating these Buddha's messages, So, but when we think for ourselves, to me, it's not very difficult to see that there's a pure unborn awareness there. There's a silence there. We're not focusing on the past or the future. We're like a rock stone falling in water, and the water's just sliding off our back like a duck. The water doesn't penetrate the feathers and get to the flesh. It's sliding off the feathers. And that's how we're existing in the world. We're sliding through all of this. And this is the Buddha's teaching, not to be attached. Joyfully unattached. He didn't say be joyfully unattached and then have debates and arguments about specific teachings. No, he said be joyfully unattached. If you're suffering, there's desire behind it. What happens when you let go of the desire? There's no suffering. How? You're making a change in the moment to not be attached. With wholesome thoughts like awareness, nurturing, forgiveness, loving kindness and compassion. These are the things we're doing. So this is why we're remaining unattached.